Hello, my name is Tamaris Dominguez, and my assigned chapter is 5 Anthropological Approaches to Personality and Studies. Anthropological study of personality centers around the relationship between culture and personality. Cultural anthropology is the most relevant field, which also contains two subfields: ethnology, which means the comparative study of various cultures, and ethnography, the intensive descriptive study of a single culture. A few years later, there was another subfield added, which was culture and personality, and this means the cross-cultural studies of perception, cognition, affect, and mental and behavioral disorders. Robert Levine, he was a noted anthropologist on culture and personality, and he raised three basic questions. Number one, are there psychological differences between human populations? Number two, what are the causes in individual development of psychological differences between populations? And number three, how are psychological differences between populations related to the social culture environment of those populations? There was a quote in the chapter that I found very interesting, which was, human beings do not feel the same in diverse societies about their fellow humans, their gods, and objects. And in the long run, such differences will find expression in their individual and group behavior. The next category is culture and personality studies. There was 5 basic theoretical position on the relationship between culture and personality. Number one is anti-culture personality positions. Number two is psychoanalytical analytical reductionism. Number three is culture as a determinant of personality. Number four, culture as both the determinant and expression of personality. And number five, culture and personality as interdependent systems. Number one and number two minimizes the significance of cross-cultural differences. Number three, once the forerunner and the most influential school of culture and personality studies. Number four and five have been the focus of the most recent studies. The next category is cultural as a determinant of personality. The earliest approach in culture and personality studies is the configurational approach, and this was pioneered by Ruth Benedict. There was 2 quotes in this section which caught my attention, and the first one was, a culture, like an individual, is more or less a consistent pattern of thought and action. The second one, within each culture there come into being characteristics, purposes not necessarily shared by other types of societies. Benedict's view, culture was personality. In other words, personality was an aspect of culture, the aspect in which the emotional responses and cognitive capacities of the individual were programmed in accordance with the overall design or configuration of his culture. Social relations, religion, politics, art, and recreation were programmed in accordance to the same design. Benedict studied distinctive cultural patterns or configurations of 3 groups of people to understand the group differences in personality characteristics. The first one was the Zuni, the second one was the Dobu, and the third one was the Kawikutil. I can't really pronounce that one. It's so difficult, but it's in the outline. She found that each culture has its own configuration, which seemed to mold a distinctive pattern of group personality. Margaret Mead's biggest findings were that, number one, the Samoan adolescent girls did not experience conflict and rebellion that we might expect from American girls. Number two, temperamental differences between sexes were largely determined by culture. Criticisms against Benedict and Mead's work include subjective impressionism, overgeneralization, cultural reductionism, contradictory information. Some of the most serious questions for the cultural determinist configuration approach. Number one, how does a particular cultural configuration of the group become part of the individual's personality? Number two, how does the individual's personality affect cultural configuration of the group? These questions were pursued by Abraham Gardner in terms of his theory of basic personality structure. Gardner viewed personality as the intervening variable between primary institutions, which were causes, and secondary institutions, which were the effects. This approach has also been called the childhood determinist approach, or also known as the personality mediation view. Withing's findings include number one, child training practices and their immediate effect on the child. Satisfaction or anxiety are closely related with explanations of illness and therapy. Number two, compared with other societies, American middle class families start child training practices exceptionally early, and the practices are also severe. Number three, and parents in most cultures are most concerned with interpersonal relationships, aggression, than with body functions, toilet training. Those are examples. Ronald Rohner's cross-cultural studies revealed that parental warmth and control are the two major dimensions of parenting in all societies. Children rejected or neglected by their parents tend to experience a higher degree of anxiety, frustration, dependence, and aggression, more so than the children accepted by parents, and hence the former have more problems than the latter in establishing interpersonal relationships when they grow older. The two-system approach. This approach views culture and personality as two different functionality interdependent systems, social cultural institutions, and modal personality structure. And to conclude this chapter, culture and personality studies or psychological anthropology inevitably calls for an increasingly multidisciplinary approach in theory and method, especially a closer coordination between anthropology, sociology, and psychology.